Welcome to Conveyancing Matters, where this week Stu and I will be talking to landlord guru Paul Champlina. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hi there, how are you?
Good, thanks, Paul. How are you?
All good, thank you. Pleasure for being here. Thank you.
Likewise. Well, you and Stu know each other. I'm new to your joys, Paul, but as we said off air, probably for the two people watching this who don't know who you are, Paul, give us a little background and why you're the landlord's guru now.
Yeah, thank you. So look, I've been helping landlords and letting agents, been in the legal field for 33 years. I know I don't look old enough, but
obviously.
Yeah.
Did your nan get you into that, Paul?
Sure no, that was just Stuart's going to give me a tenner later for that. But, I started work, so obviously, you know, the audience are solicitors and conveyancers. Obviously, my background is legal. I worked for a law firm in Brighton, one of the biggest law firms in Sussex, actually, called Don Milam and Haddock. In 1987, I was a 16-year-old, left school, no qualifications, didn't get one O-level. Ended up, I wanted to get into fast food management. Long story short, didn't want to wear the uniform. I think it was at McDonald's at the time. And I ended up getting a job as an outdoor clerk on £4,200 a year, going to court, issuing papers, going to the High Court, and worked in a debt recovery department. And that was in the midst of the 88-90 recession, as you well know, and used to go to court and obtain possession orders at banks and a bit for the banks and building societies. And that's how I started getting into advocacy. And I moved back to London in 1990 at the age, I think it was 19 or whatever, 1920. And then I worked in a very small law firm in Camden, a one-man band that used to conveyancing. But I was jack of all trades, did a little bit of conveyancing, a bit of probate, was basically the assistant to the practitioner, the principal of the one-man band law firm, but was started doing landlord and tenant in 1991. So I issued my first possession claim while working at the solicitors in 1991, and got into landlord and tenant. And basically from there, I became a bailiff. I ended up setting a business as a private investigator, did some mad things, to say the least, where I was doing process serving, surveillance, court advocacy, tracing inquiries, collecting debts, and landlord and tenant evictions. And then in when was it? So I did that. I sold that. I sold my private investigation business. And then in 2000, I set up. That's 23 years ago. I set up Landlord Action with my former business partner Johnny, who unfortunately passed away. And we basically were innovators and we were challengers to solicitors at the time, where basically we set up a 3-step fixed fee system to issuing notices, going to court, getting court orders and getting the bailiffs in, but did it for fixed fees. No one was doing it. So basically I had a couple of lawyers came up to me at trade shows saying, oh, you know, you basically changed our game. And we did, because we kept it fixed fee. And then, of course, what happened, I remember, and then really the buy-to-let boom started in 2002, 2003. And so I started Landlord Action, and then just very quickly, because I was on to take up too much time, then I ran Landlord Action. And then in 2017, I sold Landlord Action to a company called Hamilton Fraser. And Hamilton Fraser, we own some very well-known brands within the private rental sector, such as My Deposits, the deposit scheme, the property redress scheme, which is a redress scheme for letting agents, estate agents, Client Money Protect, which is a client money protection insurance scheme, which the government brought in to protect consumers. We own Total Landlord Insurance, Landlord Zone, and Landlord Action, and we've got a few other brands. So my job now is, even though people have seen me on TV and I think I just evict tenants, which I don't, I've got a team of 23 staff at Landlord Action. We do about 2,500 instructions a year, but my main job is I'm Chief Commercial Officer for the group. So we've got 250 staff. So I oversee sales and marketing and a whole lot of other stuff, basically. So I wear lots of different hats, but that's me in a nutshell.
Oh, thanks, Paul. So Stu, how did you come across Paul?
So I've known Paul for a while now, and we've both been consulting for a company called Title Guardian. We both had a similar interest in fraud and property fraud. Paul, obviously, from the landlord's point of view, them being maybe the main target, and me from obviously a general client sort of bank. So we kind of come together on that basis, and hit it off ever since.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, superb. Excellent. Well, thanks for inviting me for your party. I have to say, thanks. So, Paul, you kind of, you're really well known in the game for, for the stand that you take, particularly in relation to landlords, of course. And of course, the Housing Act's been a bit of a gift for a long, long time for landlords. And really, I always took the view was really the sort of foundation for the buy-to-let boom in a way. Obviously, knowing that we could get the property back was a big deal in comparison with the Rent Act 77. So, Paul, I think of massive interest to our conveyancing viewers clearly is the Renters Reform Bill. So, you've been advising government, you've been on various committees. The bill has been introduced. I think it's staggering around the second reading stage in the House of Commons. So what insights can you give our conveyancing colleagues, Paul, in relation to the Renters Reform Bill? What's your overview first?
Yeah, so the overview is there was 12 points, okay? Most of the points put forward are pretty reasonable, okay? The biggest worry for landlords, letting agents, is actually the banning of Section 21, which I'll give you a bit more detail on. The court reforms, and the courts are slower now than they ever have been. I posted it on Friday. I've had 14,000 views already about court delays, which have been some of the worst in 30 years that I've come across.
Is that still a hangover from COVID, Paul?
No, so what the problem we've got, if we just want to touch on the courts, and some of your guys obviously will know about the courts and so forth, is the court. I mean, look, there was initially going to be a housing court, and I went to the working group in, I think it was October 2019, prior to COVID, where we were going to bring in housing courts that would specialise with landlord and tenant possession hearings, have specialist judges, make there be more access remotely, have a lot more digitalisation and all that type of stuff. Then it fell way off the radar because COVID happened, and then the Renters Reform Bill came in. But everything's all interconnected. The problem we've got is we have a judge shortage. We've got a chronic bailiff shortage. And I'm doing some advisory work with the government, and we have 3 or 4 directors at Hamilton Fraser that are all on various different parts of the Renters Reform Bill. Obviously, we own my deposits. We protect £1.2 billion worth of deposits for over 160,000 landlords or something like that. So, and you were right, the 1988 was a game changer, and actually one of the best laws that came in was the deposit scheme, the deposits that came in, because you saw lots of landlords taking tenants to court and vice versa with spurious claims. The reason the Renters Reform Bill came in was there's 21% of the housing stock, according to the English Housing Survey, is not up to a decent home standard. Okay, my argument is the private rental sector is far better than the social housing sector. I've always said that, but actually stats say the other. And obviously, there's been a lot of stuff in the media. There's lots of stuff in the media at the moment. And as I said, and your viewers most probably won't see it, but this morning I did some film for Channel 4 News, which is out today, exactly about the crisis that's out there. We've now got a cost of living crisis, but we're waiting. We've got, as I said, 2,500 instructions. Landlord Action is one of the biggest companies out there that does, as a regulated company that does possession cases. We've been waiting 6 months for an eviction date in one of the central London county courts, and the rent's £2,500, £3,000 a month. So landlords are taking a big hit. They had a big hit with regard to COVID. The biggest change that's happened is you've got the Renters Reform Bill coming in. Landlords don't understand Section 8, and they want to be able to get their property back, and they want to have confidence in the court. And there's a massive question mark over that, Lorraine. But actually, if you think about what's happened, landlords are being vilified. Okay,
absolutely.
You've had the section. You've had Section 24 tax that came in, interest mortgage relief, which you can't offset. You've got an additional 3% stamp duty. Then, of course, what the biggest game changer, where I've never seen so many landlords exit the market in the last.
I was going to ask you that, Paul. What are you? Is that really happening on the ground? You see
massively.
We see headlines on it, but where's that housing stock going, Paul? I mean, is it doing what the policymakers would want, i.e. supposedly, releasing stock for our lovely first-time buyers, or actually is it just being snapped up by the landlords?
Well, I think it's above, it's all and above, to be honest. I've got some stats for you. Last year, 21-22 disposal figures, there was 153,000 properties that came out the private rental sector, landlords exiting. 60% of our business that we do at Landlord Action now, and I've never ever seen it before, Lorraine, is Section 21 cases where landlord says, I'm getting out, I want to sell.
Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, when the banning of Section 21 comes in, you're going to get even more landlord panic. I call it landlord panic. We have a rental stock crisis. You know, the last 2 years alone, there's been an increase of 26% of landlords getting out the market. I mean, a stat that came out on Friday from the National Residential Landlord Association, who I work and our organisation work very closely with, says 12% of their landlords have sold properties in the last 3 months period this year, which is worrying, you know. And then, of course, if you look at it, the government have earned £1.83 billion in capital gains tax. So it's a massive earner for them. The problem you've got, and I've been calling this rental stock crisis for the last 3 to 4 years. I've been seeing it coming, and it was only going to escalate. And now we are at crisis point, I'm telling you now, is that you're having on average, I mean, Rightmove produced some figures, and they said on average there's 20 requests to view a property for each property. I've heard of one story of 100 tenants going for one property.
Oh yeah.
It's horrendous. So of course what's happening is historically, and of course the big change in all of this is Liz Truss. She cocked everything up, as we well know. And mortgage rates have gone through the roof. I don't have to tell you. Your conveyancers, you see this day in, day out. You know, you've got landlords that were on fixed term of 2 years or 1%, and now all of a sudden they're paying 6-7%. It's not feasible. So what's happening is now they need vacant possession. They're serving Section 21 notice. They want their property back and they want to sell. But the reality is their market is coming down a bit, of course. But we needed a correction. It was all unsustainable, you know, to a certain extent. But the problem you've got is with some tenants. Now what's happening is all of a sudden a tenant that was living in a property, and I heard of a story, and it's coming out tonight on this Channel 4 piece, you know, and we get it all the time. You know, tenants been in a property 10, 15 years. Landlords only put the rent up 2-3 times. They're not doing yearly. This myth that landlords are putting rents up every year is a myth. You know, they're putting them up now because they're forced to. I mean, I met a guy, a pal of mine that I train at the gym with. He's got a mortgage. An interest-only mortgage he pays he was paying £350 for. His mortgage has gone up to £1,100 a month, right? What's the unintended consequence? Some of these landlords need to get out. They're serving Section 21 notices. They're waiting for vacant possession. The tenant has to move. Where do they move to? They're now fighting with multiple other tenants, and then it becomes a bidding war. And then, you know, and it's tough because, of course, we have a housing crisis, but more importantly, out of all of that, we have a social housing crisis, which
exactly
is picking up.
So, Stu, what do you find it?
Yeah,
from a point of view.
Yeah, we've seen exactly the same kind of thing. A lot of the commercial clients that we have with big portfolios, but you know, a lot are looking to sell. And when I say a lot, maybe 50%. It's a huge number.
Wow.
A huge
but how much
number.
are they looking to offload, Stu? I'm still trying to get a bit of a handle for myself and just get rid of the whole lot.
A whole lot. But one of the questions I had to Paul, and you've half covered it, Paul, is, you know, is it because of the reform, or is it because of the cost of living? Because it's
amalgamation of everything.
It's the perfect storm.
It's a perfect storm. I mean, look, this has been happening for a while. You have the landlords that are embarrassed and being called a landlord. I mean, actually, the word landlord is dated. It's actually a housing provider.
Yeah.
You know, I am your landlord. You know, I mean, so there's an argument that word is dated. And I write about it on our website, Landlord Zone, which is one of the biggest landlord portals out there. And then, of course, you had the introduction of mortgage interest relief, which really affected a lot of people if they weren't incorporated, didn't have an SPV company that in place. Additional 3% stamp duty. You've had the real worry of interest rates. You know, the reality is, guys, is that landlords do have short memories. They've had 0% interest rates for the best part of 10, 12 years. You know, we're not at the days where, you know, when I was repossessing in 88, 90, when the interest rate was 14, 15%, you know, but it's all, we've had 14 rises on the spin. And then, of course, you've got regulation coming in. Yeah. Then, of course, you've got EPC upgrades, which has been kicked into the long grass. There's a lot of stuff happening. And a lot of these landlords that have been landlords for 15, 20 years that have done well, where all they needed to do was give an AST, no short tenancy, put the deposit scheme. It was easy enough. You can't
Yeah.
do that anymore. It's
No,
impossible.
you're quite right as well about the rental side of things, because from what I've seen and purely in my experience with my clients, where I've drafted the AST at the onset of them buying that property, some have held it for 5, 6, 7 years, and when I've got the paperwork in, it's still actually the same tenancy that I drafted all that time ago, and the rent's actually not gone up.
But, but you know, historically, landlords want to look after tenants. You know,
Yeah.
the problem is what doesn't help is there are tenant groups out there. You know, I can name them as Shelter and Generation Rent, where they do vilify landlords, where they should be working with landlords, because actually, you know, if I look at this, the more you poke the bear will eventually bite back. And, you know, I speak to landlords day in, day out, and they do care about tenants. And, you know, they just want a tenant to stay in the property, look after it. They want it to be treated as a home. If it's treated as a home, they look after it. As long as their rent's paid in time, they look after the property and get access, they're happy. And there's a saying that I say, and I say it all the time, for a landlord, no news is good news. You know, as long as my rent's paid. But it's managing a property now is really, really difficult. Landlords have much more responsibilities. And the biggest problem with a lot of landlords, especially the smaller landlords, you know, 85% of the market only have between 1 and 3 properties, and they're self-managing. They're the type of landlords that fall into problems where they don't belong to a member. They're not members of the NRLA, or they don't use a letting agent because it's easy to trip up.
Yeah, no, you're
Well, I
quite
think
right.
one of the problems, though, Paul, is it's easy. I mean, certainly in my experience, frankly, it's easy to set up a letting agency, and there's frankly quite a lot of dud letting agencies out there which have also got very, very poor reputations.
Yeah.
So, you know, who aren't doing what they should do, who aren't supporting their landlords with appropriate regulation, you know, fire certificates, PAT tests, and all the rest of it. So, you know, I mean, what's your view? I noticed that, you know, your organisation does training for letting agents.
Yes.
People set up.
Yeah.
But what's your view? And maybe this is a question you can't fully answer, but you know, what's your honest view on the letting agent side of the market? What sort of support do they really offer?
Okay. Well, I can answer all of that, so don't worry. I've always got an answer for most things when it comes to property.
Well, I suppose I should have said willing to answer, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm. But Stuart would tell you I'm willing to answer anything, more or less. So, you know, within reason. So look, I mean, look, we represent our organisation at Hamilton Fraser 22,000 letting agents. So that's My Deposits, the Property Redress Scheme, Client Money Protect, and then obviously other brands such as Landlord Action, where letting agents use us. So, you know, there's only 2 schemes out there: the Property Ombudsman and us, the Property Redress Scheme. So, you know, we deal with complaints from the consumer, the landlord, the tenant, about letting agents. What is going to coming back to the Renters Reform Bill, just quickly, Lorraine, is there is going to be landlord redress. You've got 2.3 million landlords out there. Every landlord's going to have to be part of a redress scheme. There is an argument to say, actually, is it landlord registration? Well, in a way it is. They have that in Scotland. In Wales, what they do is they do a thing called Rent Smart Wales, where you actually have to go on a course and be accredited. And I'm all for that, you know. So I do loads of training. So I do a lot of training, and people can go on my site, which is paulshamplina.tv. I've even trained solicitors before on the Renters Reform Bill, you know, and letting agents. I train letting agents. So what's going to happen is when you talk about training for letting agents, they were going to bring in ROPA, Regulation of Property Agents.
That kept getting knocked into the long grass, didn't it?
That's into the long grass because we've got the Renters Reform Bill. So, and you're right, anyone can set up a letting agency, okay? ROPA will make sure that you have to have a level 4, level 5 to be able to run it, but that's further down the line. So, you know, we are one of the major organisations that deals with letting agents. So you've got to belong to a redress scheme by law. You've got to have client money protection in place. So it's the equivalent, Lorraine, if you go on a holiday, you want to make sure that it's ABTA or ATOL backed, just like if you use a letting agent, you want to make sure they've got client money protection in place. So we are the biggest independent provider there for client money protection. We've got 4,500 members. And then, of course, the deposit schemes. I even set up in COVID, I set up a letting agent advice line called HF Assist, because I wasn't happy with the advice lines that were out there, because I've been working on the phones for years and years. I found they were very legal rather than property and letting centric. So we set that up. So, you know, agents need to be trained. They need to understand landlords better. And I can tell you now, 25% of the complaints we get at the Property Redress Scheme about letting agents is mainly because of poor property management and poor communication. So you pay
Yeah, I believe that.
you pay a letting agent a full management fee, let's say 12%, and they're acting like it's let only. But there are some very, very poor letting agents out there. And you'll know, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but the program I did, Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords, I always made it my mission to expose dodgy letting agents in every single series. And I've done quite a few.
Conveyancer Paul's acting on a buy-to-let for a client, and obviously we have to be very careful about you know, what advice we can give and can't give. But what, without, and this sounds really rude and I don't mean it, Paul, but without sort of like selling a product, if you like, what do you think conveyancers should be advising their prospective buy-to-let clients about, you know, choice of a letting agent? Because we tend to just act for clients, don't we, Stu, that, you know, buy a property with a tenant in it, take over all the existing, you know, even if it's crap, sort of thing.
I think it's a really important point to make as well, because there's a massive difference between acting for somebody that's going to let the property than somebody that's going to move in. And I don't think there's enough differential between the two.
I think
almost a completely separate process.
I think inquiries. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Lorraine, actually. I mean, look, your conveyancers, yeah, so you conveyancers, you've got owner-occupiers, obviously, which is your vast majority. You've got investors, landlords that are buying, obviously, investments. So there's two different conversations, two different customers. I think if you are acting for investors, you know, and you have to be buy-to-let experts, there's no two ways about that. You have to give them some general advice about lending criteria, obviously all the legals, all the compliance, which is why they're coming to you. Manage their expectations, yeah, which is difficult, you know. I know I've purchased the buy-to-lets. I know how long it takes. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute, dealing with lenders, what they're doing, what they're going for, the stress testing, all that is horrendous. But then when you're talking about letting agents, I would say to any landlord now who's getting in or coming into the business, who hasn't been in the business, use a letting agent. So who do you pick? You go down Basildon High Street. I'm saying that now for your purposes, Stuart. You go down Basildon High Street and there's 10 agents. Who do you use? You know, do you use ABC, Nickit, the rent and lettings, you know, that charge 4% full management? So you have to do your due diligence, because you're going to give your property over, your biggest asset, which you just bought, and you need control. So you can't be getting recommendation from other landlords. There's a really good website called allagents.co.uk, which your conveyancers can go on and they can look, obviously, geographically. You can obviously, you know, you'll get testimonials from other landlords that can use them. And then really, when a landlord is going to an agent, so they could be buying a property with tenant in situ, but if the tenant is good and in situ, why would you want to get rid of them? You're just going to make sure your paperwork is all compliant. So you need to make sure the tenancy agreement is done properly. You're going to make sure you serve your Section 48 notice to make sure the rents come direct to you. You've got to make sure you're fully compliant with the Deregulation Act, the deposit is protected, all that type of stuff. So you're making sure you've got a clean slate. And then actually, where is that landlord in the life of them being a landlord? Do they really want to fully manage a property? Do they want to take a call from their tenant at 5 a.m. that they're drunk and lost their keys or the boiler's broken down? Most probably no. And actually, the difference between let only and fully management is normally about 5%. If you divide that into 12 on the management fee, you're looking at pennies. It's not a lot of money. You know, and you can offset it against your tax anyway. So a managing agent is to manage a property. And historically, letting agents and managing agents are underpaid for what they do, because if you divide it on an hourly rate, it's pittance, because they're spending.
Yeah, that's the same boat as conveyancers have been in for years, Paul. Right?
Oh, here we go. I'm going to get the violin out for you now. Okay.
There isn't one small enough, mate.
Oh, I feel sorry for you conveyancers. But anyway, but you do, because at the end of the day, it's about retaining customers. Yeah. So your conveyancers, you've got landlords, there might be active landlords, they want to buy investments. There's going to be opportunities out there where obviously prices come down and they can snap up some bargains. You know, buy to let is great, it is good, but obviously now you're going to see the smaller landlords, some of them, you know, and it is, as we've said, everyone's looking to come out the market. And the biggest challenge for a lot of these landlords now is not so much selling their property, because there's always a price for a property, is now going to be the challenge of capital gains.
Yeah. So, Stu, I was gobsmacked, actually, the amount of landlords that we deal with that were a bit ignorant of that tax.
I'm not.
I'm not.
Oh, well, maybe I should be. Yeah. And I suppose that leads into another theory that I have, and that is, especially during COVID, it became so attractive to buy properties for let. And it's become really, really, really fashionable. You know, there's so many things on social media now. You know, you can give up your job, passive income.
Load of rubbish.
It's anything but passive, is it really?
It's not passive. I mean, I've been property educated, like I said, since I did my first talk, literally the year I set up. So for 23 years, I've been public speaking properly to landlords and letting agents and to all different types of crowds and stuff. Passive income, it's, you know, you need money. People say no money down deals, build a portfolio up, £1 million portfolio for this. A lot of it's a load of rubbish, obviously. You've got to have money. You've got to have your chunk of money. But actually, it's now tougher being a landlord than ever before. Okay. If you can get the right property for the right deal, then it can make sense. Do your numbers. Business plan. You've got a business plan this. But there are landlords exiting the marketplace. They've made hay while the sun shines, and they've done quite well. But, you know, sourcing and doing deals and buying property, that's the sexy stuff, right? Yeah. Managing an AST, right, is the toughest thing to do, and actually needs to use a managing agent. So, you know, do they belong to Arla, Property Mark, you know, or Nowls or Eucala or Ricks, you know? What accreditation do they have in place? You know, what's their reputation locally? You know, you have to have a feel. Go into their offices. You know, what's their terms of business? No one reads what their terms of business, but if you read what a letting agent, managing agent does during the term of a tenancy, collecting the rent, inspections, putting the deposit, collecting, doing rent arrears, you know, doing all the compliance, you know, it's endless. You know, key change, this, that, whatever. It's absolutely endless. So, as any landlord that's getting into this, or any conveyancer that's acting for new landlords, I would say to them, you know, even if you want to do self-management, you know, yourself, I would say if you're first use a letting agent to do full management, and then you can learn by it.
Definitely.
So I'm interested to know from the conveyancer perspective, because I worry these days, actually, because really I think, you know, the tenancy deposit scheme was the kind of, I think basically it was the nail in the coffin for your high street conveyancer doing tenancy agreements and doing ASTs, really. That was always my view, really, and that just passed over to the letting agents. But Stu, given everything that Paul said, you know, which should be scaring our conveyancer colleagues watching this quite considerably, I now think a conveyancer acting on a buy-to-let is actually becoming quite specialist. And I actually think quite a lot of conveyancers still kind of dip their toe in that pool, think, oh yeah, buy-to-let, tenants already in there, needn't worry. I mean, what's your view on that, Stu?
Yeah, I completely agree. If you say specialist, I would class it as a high-risk transaction.
Yeah.
Because of the information that you need to be aware of. And Paul mentioned terms and conditions. You know, the retainer that you have with your client is absolutely essential, setting out what advice you're going to give them. Because, as you say, Joan, if you're not a specialist in landlord and tenant and you've not done them before, then, you know, you need to evaluate whether you can actually act for the client, because it is a different type of transaction. It's high risk because there's a commercial side behind this as well. You know, often landlords aren't buying properties at market value. You know, they're buying
them with aggravation, aren't they?
Yeah, so they can be a distressed sale, so that has implications with the mortgage potentially. There's a whole host more information, more going on. And of course, you know, the irony of the whole thing, you've got to do it probably double as quick because the commercial elements of the sale and purchase. So it's a high risk transaction. You know, often you're not buying in the name of the person. It could be a limited company. So you could go on and on and on. But the retainer that you have with the client is absolutely essential, that it spells out exactly what advice you're giving them.
So, Stu, I mean, I was probably going to conclude by asking Paul for his views on the Renters Reform Bill and timing, but you know, Paul's your guest, you invited him. Anything else you want to ask that I've missed?
No, go on, you might as well crack on with that, Paul.
So Paul, Renters Reform Bill, come on, where are we at with it? What's your feeling on the ground? You're way closer to the ground than any of us. It feels
I'm only
knocked into the long grass to me. So where are we at? What can our conveyancing colleagues expect, Paul?
So the Renters Reform Bill, I mean, don't forget, I don't think the reading's going to be seen until after Christmas. That's my gut feeling. I've spoken to a couple of people that are close to it as well. You know, the argument I've had, you can't, I mean, look, the biggest headline is the banning of Section 21.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me touch on that because I've been really heavily involved in that. Section 21 is a 2-month notice to end the contract, right? They say no non-fault, but there's always a fault. At the moment, it's now selling. 50% in the past has always been for rent arrears, where landlords haven't wanted to claim the rent arrears, they just want their property back. Antisocial behaviour, massive problem. You go under a ground called ground 14 under the section 8 ground. It's a discretion ground. So they need to update the grounds. They need to make them more mandatory. Okay. We need to make sure we can get quicker hearing dates. We need confidence in the court system. We need to be actually, there needs to be mediation that's brought in, which early on. Okay. We are in, I'm really worried about the industry. So you can't rush the section 21, the banning of it, until you have resource into the court. Okay. You can bring mediation in. You meet and landlords can get their property back in a reasonable time. They are going to say that if you sell the property and move back in, they're going to be mandatory grounds, just like rent arrears. So there's periodic tenancy. So there's a big problem at the moment where when they announced it, we turned around and said, well, what about student landlords, right? That needs to be exempt, like purpose block, because you have term time. At the moment, you know, with the new provisions in, a tenant can move in and after a month they can give notice. Yeah, there's a lot of costs relating to moving and obviously setting up new tenancies. Then, of course, the other stuff that's coming in, Lorraine, is a property portal, whereby this would be great for conveyances. When you've got the URN number, you stick it in, and then everything comes up relating to that property. Now, you know, we know what IT is all about. It's a complete nightmare. But can you imagine to put every single property on one portal? Which
I think though, I think the thing is, Paul, that from my perspective, the outside looking in, there's such a massive amount of fragmentation across the market, particularly in relation to prop tech. And I think your list of, you know, confidence in the courts, etc., is all absolutely right. But we know the absolute dog's breakfast that the government have made of the Building Safety Act. You know, we know the dog's breakfast of other legal portals, whether it's applying for a grant of probate, whether it's the criminal litigation portal. We know the government, you know, the personal injury one. We know that the government can't deal with those sorts of projects. So
no, correct.
What confidence do you have that this isn't going to be introduced without the appropriate sort of resourcing support, etc., from government, and where again the conveyancers, the likes of Stuart the Coalface, are just going to be all told to bugger off and deal with it? Because that's where we're all at with the Building Safety Act.
The same old thing again, doesn't it?
It really does.
I mean, look. So the answer, the question is, there's 12 that, you know. Just on some of the other points, and I will answer that question very quickly. So, you know, you can't advertise no children or DSS, you know, no social tenants. Well, that's, you know, it's discriminatory. Of course, that makes sense. Tenants having requests for pets, that's very reasonable. You know, having a redress scheme so the tenant has, as a consumer, having more money for enforcement. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is sound bites, great. Giving tenants greater protection and whatever, they're paying rent. You know, a tenant now is paying the best part of 35 to 40% of their wages towards rent. It's becoming unsustainable, Lorraine. All right. The reality is this: it most probably won't come in for a couple of years. Okay, you can't rush it. You need the provisions in place. In the meantime, we're having a landlord exodus. Okay, there's more landlords coming out of the market, and the question you asked me is, do I have confidence? Most probably not is the answer to your question. I'm being honest, because I'm not seeing what they're doing with regard to the court system, with regard to the resourcing of what's happening. That's why I mean, I was unsure about housing courts beforehand, but now I really want it on board and to be ring-fenced. I mean, let me give you this stat, which has just come out. Lenders have reported that the number of private landlords in arrears with their buy-to-let mortgages has increased by 28% over the last 3 months. It's only going to increase more, isn't it?
Of course it is.
Massive.
You know, so at the moment, we've just got to watch and wait. I would say to all your conveyancers, subscribe to our free website, landlordzone.co.uk. We have a great editor called Nigel Lewis that also writes for The Negotiator, and he writes a lot of stuff about conveyancing in there. You need to get updated all the time with regard to the property rental sector, especially if you're asking for investors. You know, your job is to signpost. Yeah. You can't be an expert on everything, especially, as you well told me, Lorraine, for your very reasonable fixed fees that you're charging your clients.
Well, exactly. Well, Paul, it sounds to me as if Stu's going to have to get you back on, lovely. I think you're going to have to come back on when this is a bit further down the road. So,
Definitely.
well, Paul, Stu, I'll leave you to say
Yeah,
the
look,
goodbyes because you invited
yeah,
Paul.
look, Paul's been a great chat. I'm sure everyone found it really interesting. Loads of sort of jam-packed information and stats there as well for everyone to take away from this chat. So thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on, and I'll speak to you all soon.
Pleasure.
Take
Thank you for
care.
having me.
Bye.
Bye.